record. Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the ACEC Research Institute's Future of Engineering Roundtable Series. In today's session, lump sum contracting, current practices, opportunities, and challenges. Before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping announcements. For the easiest view, move your mouse to the top of your screen and select Gallery View. This will allow you to see all panelists. Your microphone was muted upon entry, but if you wish to ask a question or offer a comment, please feel free to type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as time permits. This event is open to the media, and the press is invited to participate as well with our other attendees by asking a question through the Q&A box. We are recording today's event for future viewing. If you require any technical assistance, please feel free to send a message to ACEC Research Institute privately through the Q&A box, and I will be happy to assist you. Now, allow me to introduce the Executive Director of the ACEC Research Institute, Daphne Bryant, who would like to say a few words.
Thank you, Carrie, and welcome, everyone. We are thrilled to be with you today to talk about the report on lump sum. And we've got some great folks here to talk about it. And I think you will find this very interesting. So we have Javier Baldor, who is the CEO of BST Global. He has a very interesting perspective on this topic as it relates to the technology of impact and AI. And so we're excited to hear from him. We have the study's author, Dr. Michael Garvin, who is the professor at Virginia Tech in their engineering department. And we've worked closely with Mike over the past several months putting this project together. And we're excited for him to be here to share the results with you. And then we have Eric Pelfrey from Kentucky, who is running their transportation department and has a unique client perspective for you. So we're hoping to kind of cover all the bases. And as Carrie said, open to Q&A. So please feel free to stick your comments or questions in. We'll get to as many as we can throughout the session as well. And moderating the session is our senior research consultant from the Institute, Kevin McMahon. Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you to take it away.
Great, Daphne. Thanks so much. We've got a great panel here. Let's get started. Mike Garvin, who is our principal investigator in this study, will review the research objectives.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. So I think the overall sort of objective of the research was to really characterize the landscape of lump sum utilization, in the transportation sector. And so that was the primary and overarching objective. Associated with that was we get a better sort of assessment of how lump sum commercial structures are being used. Specifically, what were the advantages and disadvantages of these types of arrangements from the perspectives of the participants in the study, and then to look at what are opportunities and challenges for increasing utilization of lump sum in the provision of engineering and design services.
Thanks, Mike.
Whoa.
What
I'm
happened?
so sorry. I have no idea. Let me just go back a little bit here. All right, there we go. Sorry about that.
Daphne, before we get started in diving in deeper, I'd like to ask Javier to just give a little bit of an overview as he sees the commercial, atmosphere changing with the advent of AI and other, development of a lot of different technology tools. Javier, can you just give us some initial thoughts?
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Kevin and Daphne, for this opportunity. Super excited to be here today. Maybe perhaps to share a few sentiments on the future of our industry from my perspective. I believe at a very high level, we're ushering in the fourth industrial revolution, and it will be powered by all things AI and data related. I believe it's going to transform our industry as we know it in a couple of key areas. First of all, how the work is done on a day-to-day basis, and give you a little bit of of context from a research perspective, McKinsey, which is a global consulting and research organization, estimates that Gen AI alone is going to add about $4.4 trillion to the global economy on an annual basis. And along with other emerging technologies, it has the potential to automate work activities that consume up to 70% of an employee's time every single day. So that's a stunning figure. And that's why I feel that this lump sum study and research initiative by the ACEC Research Institute is so important right now. Consulting engineering firms are going to need to make massive investments in new and emerging technologies. Think of things like AI, machine learning, and big data, while also retraining and upskilling their professionals if they hoped rather to be prepared to prosper and survive in the future. And if our industry can achieve these productivity gains, the business model, which has been largely time and materials based for decades, is going to be upended, in my opinion, and must go to lump sum, as otherwise it's a race to the bottom and is completely unsustainable. And I believe if the underlying business model does not evolve and change to one that is value-based, the entire industry will arguably be at risk. And I was installed in the ACEC Research Institute board in April of this year, which is a tremendous honor. And I had the privilege to write the foreword to this excellent lump sum study that's being presented today, where I spoke to this. The second key point that I want to share is I believe the industry itself as we know it is going to be transformed in the coming years, and it's going to move from a traditional AEC firm that provides engineering and design services to become a data business that will be powered by AI, all things AI. And you'll see likely a wave of technology companies by way of mergers and acquisitions, bringing AI and data expertise and marrying it with deep engineering domain experience found in our industry, driving this disruption. And lastly, I'm excited to share that today we've globally announced the creation of the BSD Global AI and Data Consortium, comprised of 8 of the world's leading firms, including the likes of AECOM, Arup, Stantec, and WSP, to name a few, to shape the future of our industry centered on AI as we enter this 4th industrial revolution. So a little bit of context there, Kevin. Thank you.
Javier, thanks so much for that insight. Mike, can you just share with the group who participated in this study?
Sure. So I think it's probably important to understand that the research approach taken for this study was the use of interviews as opposed to, say, a survey instrument, primarily because interviews give you an opportunity to get a deeper and richer data set. And so the study, we looked at or interviewed 14 different client organizations. Majority of those were state DOTs, but there were a few public authorities, and then 3 federal clients that we interviewed as part of the process. And then on the engineering side, we interviewed 9 different engineering firms. Majority of them were large engineering firms, but about a even split between large and small and medium. Might wonder, say, perhaps why we didn't interview a few more client organizations or engineering firms, and part of that was, as we were conducting these interviews and we were completing and reviewing the results, we started to reach, what you might call a point of saturation, where in many respects we were starting to hear the same things from the different types of organizations. And so I believe if we'd expanded this to maybe interview a few more organizations or even firms, I'm not sure that we would have heard anything different from what we were already hearing.
Great, Mike. Should be noted too that of the engineering firms, 8 of the 9 operated in multiple states and had multiple clients, and their perspectives from the senior folks who Mike and I interviewed actually were of a multi-state perspective. So we got a large amount of the country covered by those 8 engineering firms. Next slide. Mike, can you just describe what we found on a high level basis in the use of lump sum?
Sure. So I think what this graph is really trying to illustrate is that in many respects, you've got clients that are using lump sum on a rather extensive basis, perhaps, more than 80% of the service contracts that they're employing. And then, about the other half, using it either not at all or less than 10%. But I think it's important to note of that 6 that are in that category of greater than 80%, 3 of those are federal agencies. So if you take those 3 federal agencies out, it starts to look a little bit more, probably where I think the industry sits, and particularly in the transportation sector now, is where you have some amount of DOTs using lump sum arrangements, but more often than not, DOTs are making a use of these lump sum arrangements on a rather limited basis. And then you have a few that are somewhere in between, using it, less than for 50% of the time, but obviously greater than 10% of the time.
All right, thanks, Mike. Back to that slide, Daphne,
Oh,
please.
sorry.
Eric, were you surprised by these percentages from your fellow clients?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Appreciate the question and also the opportunity to be a part of the panel and also on the study. Yeah, initially I was surprised because exactly what Michael said. We are, I think in Kentucky, we're one of the few DOTs that largely does utilize lump sum versus cost plus a fixed fee. So initially I was a little bit surprised, of course, hearing Michael's explanation that half of that 6 came from the federal perspective, where they do utilize more lump sum. That obviously justifies that. But yeah, I think we are one of the few that largely uses lump sum, and I'll be eager to share some of the tips and tricks and things that have worked for us over the past to help some others.
We're looking forward to that. Eric, one last question on this topic. You mentioned that you're one of the more predominant heavier users of lump sum contracting. Do you find your fellow DOT friends are reaching out to you for advice as they maybe start to think about moving down this road?
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of recent inquiries regarding lump sum, and I think a lot of the other DOTs and other agencies similar to us, that they understand that Kentucky has used lump sum largely over the past decade or more. They're wanting to understand why it's been successful for us. I don't blame them at all, because we try to learn from each other. If somebody's making a mistake, we obviously don't want to make the same mistake. It's a little bit of a shift to go from a cost plus to a fixed fee or to a lump sum, and that's we'll get into that here in a little bit as well. But there's really not as much that goes into it, but at the same time, they don't want to put all their eggs in one basket if it's not going to work for them. So they want to understand what's been important, what's worked for us. Communication and coordination with the industry is always huge. But yeah, we've had, in addition to you guys reaching out from Virginia Tech and South Carolina DOT, we've also had our MASTO region group that's reached out to us. Also, Illinois DOT has reached out to us. The New York, New Jersey Port Authority has reached out to us, and I'm sure there's some others recently as well. But we're always willing to help.
Well, thanks. The industry appreciates your willingness to do that. Daphne, next slide. Mike, can you describe where we found that the lump sum arrangements generally work better?
So from the perspective of those that were interviewed, nearly all felt like, engineering design services that were doing detailed design, regardless of whether they're using lump sum or not, it was appropriate for that, lump sum is appropriate for those types of services. When you start to look at other types of services, from say project development and planning, to preliminary design and construction and inspection, the frequency, I guess, of the perspective of the suitability of lump sum for those types of services dropped off, quite dramatically. But with that said, we did find instances of, using lump sum in even the earliest stages of a project's development, and we can speak to that a little bit more as we move through the presentation about how that essentially works. And then, maybe somewhat surprising. We saw, where most people would tend to think that, you're not going to do C&I types of services using a lump sum arrangement. At least a few of the clients that we did interview are using that approach, primarily in a situation where they've got a really good understanding of the scope of the work that needs to be provided, during the construction phase, and feel confident that they can establish a lump sum price for that type of services, within a reasonable range of, say, plus or minus 5%. And then if there's a situation where, the expectation of the services are going to be provided and C&I changes, they would issue an amendment to accommodate that sort of change. So, but this is, I don't know that this is all that surprising to see the sort of frequency of the responses, relative to the types of services that people think are most suited for lump sum arrangements.
Thanks, Mike. Eric, from the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet's point of view, is this use in different activities? Does this mirror your experience, or are you guys a little different than this average here?
A little bit. I'd say honestly, Kevin, the majority of contracts that we do in the transportation cabinet across the board are lump sum. The only really one of these four categories that we really don't use lump sum for is the construction, engineering, and inspection. We use a specific rate of compensation largely for those types, which is basically a loaded wage rate per hour per person. But really, like Michael said, here in Kentucky, we almost always use a phased procurement project approach. So if a project's going to start with planning, we'll do a lump sum contract for planning and allow that contract to potentially be modified to go into your phase 1 engineering, and then potentially also be modified to go into your phase 2 engineering. Really, I think it really all comes down to risk and resources. Where we feel like there's not much risk and where we don't have a lot of resources at the cabinet, we have 4,000 employees. 400 of those employees are engineers. We don't have enough engineers to do all the work, of course. That's why we rely on our robust industry. But even within those engineers, we want our engineers to actually do engineering work. We don't want them to be bookkeepers and auditors. We want them to be able to lead these projects and be able to deliver the projects on schedule using our consultants to do so. But we don't want them to check monthly invoices. That's what our auditors are for. So we want them to focus on what they went to school for. That obviously allows them to be happier as employees as well.
Eric, that's a great insight. I think the whole industry is trying to get engineers to do engineering and not accounting or bookkeeping activities. But beyond the fact that you don't have enough engineers, I got to think in this war for talent, or this shortage of talent, that you're just concerned about keeping their engagement levels up so they don't start looking yonder for other opportunities. Is that true?
Completely agree, and I don't want to make this a DOT versus a private firm debate, but there's a few reasons to work for both parties. With the cabinet, at least, we're the ones that actually deliver. We make the decisions. We're the ones that are kind of in control of pushing projects. Of course, we would not be successful if we did not have our industry to deliver for us. But yeah, there's a few reasons to work for the cabinet. Obviously, we don't get compensated as accordingly as our private sector folks, and there's reasons for that as well. But we do want to make the cabinet an excellent place to work, where job satisfaction's high and where they can control their own destiny. Lots of reasons to be able to move around across the cabinet to other areas. Job flexibility is key, but there's lots of different reasons to work for us, and being able to make your own decisions and deliver projects and have control of that's at the top of that list.
Great.
Hey,
Thanks
Kevin,
so
if
much.
I can jump in, just 2 questions that we've gotten so far. One, yes, we will be making the presentation available and the recording available to everyone. So don't feel like you've got to snap pictures of the slides. We will take care of that for you. And second is, we have someone who was a former audit manager at North Carolina DOT, who's a big fan of lump sum and has spent a lot of time since early 2000, crossing the country, trying to convince more people to use lump sum. So we've got at least one fan in the audience.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. I remember my first invoice I ever looked at in this industry, so many years ago when it was literally 2 feet high. I was like, what? Somebody's actually got to review this? That just was absurd. And that's, I think, a classic example of what we're trying to change. Next slide, Daphne. Mike, can you take us through what we found, what was more and less suitable for lump sum contract?
Sure. So when we talked to the different participants in the interview process, we just discussed the types of projects you would see more suitable versus those that maybe are less suitable. And on the left-hand side, you see those types of projects where the scopes of work are relatively easy to define. The scopes are relatively well understood, so it's not surprising that you see those types of projects on the left-hand side as being shown as more suitable. On the right-hand side, a little bit, not necessarily project types per se, but characteristics of projects. Complex projects where there are a lot of unknowns. Third-party engagement, that's always can be tricky. And then, complex maintenance of traffic type of requirements. But I think it's worth noting that at least a few of the agencies that we spoke with, when they're looking at these kind of characteristics on the right-hand side, that make, let's say, services or project types a little bit less suitable. Those are instances where you would see them maybe employ, a hybrid type contract where, those items of work that can be defined on a lump sum basis, they would define those in those sort of ways in those areas where there's a little bit more uncertainty, a little bit less scope definition. Those would be defined, more in a reimbursable type of structure. So hybrid contracts are not unusual, at least in those agencies that are using, lump sum in some instances, and maybe a reimbursable arrangement for those situations where you've got more uncertainty.
Yeah, Mike, I think the use of hybrid structures was encouraging when we heard that more often than not. Eric, question, can you give us some specificity on the one or two more common unknowns that you run into, and how do you handle those contractually? What do you do?
Yeah, that happens. Honestly, probably more with newer types of work, like open roads design right now, ORD. It's brand new to Kentucky, as it is to a lot of DOTs. So we're learning at the cabinet. Our consultants are learning as well. So if there's projects like that where there's newer technology, newer things that are being asked to be delivered, we have to take a step back and understand, is this something we want to use lump sum on, or is it something, like you said, if we want to use more of a hybrid structure? So we have several different types of contracts here. We have the lump sum, which we use, I'd say probably 80% of the time or more. But then we also utilize our cost plus fixed fee types of contracts. And there's really not a lot difference except for a little bit less profit. For a lump sum, we use a 15% profit. For a cost plus fixed fee, we use a 10% profit. And then, of course, the cost plus fixed fee contracts, those are reimbursed just as the charges come out aside from that. We also have our specific rate of compensation contract that I talked about, which we largely use for inspection type of contracts. And then we also have an estimated unit price, which we use for right-of-way type work and geotechnical type work based on linear foot of being drilled or per parcel for right-of-way. So we always want to make sure that we understand what the risks are. If there's more risks, we'll move away from a lump sum, at least in a portion, to those others, and we utilize that hybrid structure, or can even go entirely towards a different type of cost method.
Great, thanks. One question again on specifics. We found our audience loves specifics. On third-party engagement, what is a typical, I guess, project that involves a third party that is not under anybody's control, that the cabinet says, geez, we don't know how long this is going to take. We need to kind of carve this out from a lump sum arrangement. Can you give us an example of one or two of those?
Yeah, Yeah, that happens a little bit. We have several statewide types of contracts, which rather than being a specific project, those are ones where we put out almost an on-call type, and then we issue smaller, what we call letter agreements for those. One of those statewide contracts is a statewide local project or local public agency, LPA contract. And a lot of times that third party is your county or your city. That municipality a lot of times may not have the exact same goals that we do at the cabinet. So sometimes there's more risk there. It's a little bit unfortunate for the consultant that may be asked to serve two bosses that may not be on the same page. So there's a little bit more unknown. We try to be flexible with that, and we have those LPA coordinators across the state as well that really do try to coordinate and communicate with those individual LPAs to make sure we're on the same page. But you're exactly right. Sometimes that just doesn't happen. And it's always harder to serve two bosses than just a single boss.
Hey, Kevin.
Yeah.
Just
Yes,
want to
definitely.
interject. I've got a comment and then a question. So the comment is, and I know we're going to get to this a little bit later on in the presentation, the idea that there are a lot of DOTs or maybe even municipal managers that don't realize they can use lump sum. And we found that in some of our study results. So I think we're going to cover that. And then the comment being that, you know, firms still have to keep the same type of records and cost records and so forth. But, you know, obviously through lump sum, the administrative process and burden, as we know, is reduced. The question for Eric is, does Kentucky do a complete detailed review of every submission under a lump sum contract?
We used to up until a couple of years ago, and I don't believe that we did the last couple of years, just because, again, lack of resources from our auditing department. But I'll hit on this just briefly now. We do keep detailed records of all those lump sum contracts. Again, I think coordinating with others across your DOT is crucial to success. We have a good relationship with our auditors, and they post audit. They used to post audit every single job. We found over a 5-year period, of course, our goal is a 15% profit, which is built into those lump sum contracts. And over a 5-year period, our actual profit was 17%. So we're okay paying an additional 2%, even though that's a large amount of money. It would absolutely eat up all of our resources if we were having to perform that work by a cost plus fixed fee type contract, or our PEs and PMs are reviewing those invoices monthly. Again, our goal is 15%. But to be brutally honest, once we negotiate a contract with a consultant, we are completely comfortable paying that lump sum fee to that consultant. If things change, we can either do a positive adjustment if we add scope, or if for some reason the consultant is contracted to perform work but is no longer asked to perform that work under contract, we can actually do a negative mod to remove that work and that fee associated with it. So again, our post audits have shown that that's incredibly effective using lump sum, and allows our limited resources to be used in the best way possible for us.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks.
And you clarified one key point, is that lump sum does not mean the absence of any difference, changes in scope and plus mods or negative mods, as Eric indicated. Thank you. Next slide, Daphne. These are just some quotes from client organizations. Mike, do you want to talk to, one or two of these?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the 2 points that these quotes are making is that, and we heard this, I think, several times, throughout the interview process, is that, the shift to lump sum allows project managers on both sides to really, focus on the deliverables. That's been sort of alluded to before. It's a focusing on the engineering design services that need to be done, as opposed to, acting as accountants or auditors of projects as the work gets completed. And then I think the other piece of it is sort of reinforcing that sort of perspective is that you're really focused on the quality of the deliverables. Are you meeting the contract requirements, and then not having to worry so much about the contract administration part, which makes it both, I think, easier as well as more cost effective.
Yeah, thanks. I think many clients indicated that, it saves them resources that they can devote to the actual project, as Mike indicated. So thanks so much. Next slide, Daphne. Okay, and this is about the impact of technology. Javier, can you talk to this? What you're starting to hear from some clients and engineering firms relative to, what's changing out there, and as you indicated earlier, why lump sum may be the only methodology that really works in a handful of years from now.
Yeah, just to tag on to some of my earlier remarks, I believe that this is the only way forward. One can debate what the percentage is in terms of efficiency, whether that's 30, 40, 50%, depending on which research organization you base that off of, but it's significant. And if you are reliant on a time materials business model, it's a race to the bottom. It's completely unsustainable, particularly in light of the massive investment that is going to be needed to upskill talent. So I think another myth or misnomer is, I don't know, ACEC represents a broad spectrum of firms, is that over the past couple of years, I've been speaking actually to the move towards AI for the last few years. Many firms early on felt that this was a big company thing, that this was only the largest firms can afford to embrace AI and big data and those kind of things. And I believe it's a great equalizer. I believe that the smaller firms, mid-sized firms actually have an advantage in that they can move more adeptly in embracing these technologies. Many of these technologies are widely available in an open source environment, whether that's machine learning or big data. Many of these, ChatGPT obviously was ushered in a whole new era of technologies to really drive large language models and make it available for all. So I just encourage all firms to really start embracing these things and leaning into it. Much like I believe AI and big data is going to be much like the third industrial revolution, which was the internet, right? It wasn't a big company thing. It's an every company thing. And I believe that this has the same promise, but perhaps magnified going forward. So certainly a lot of hype around it. I don't want to overhype it, but there's some real substance here to reimagine the way work is done and projects and the business is managed.
Great, Javier, thank you for that. And Mike, I think the message here, maybe you could just reinforce it, is that both the clients and the engineering firms indicated that they don't see in the immediate future that this is just going to take away engineers' needs to the need for engineers to understand the project and use intuition and good common sense to get projects done.
Kevin, I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, I think we heard that from, particularly the engineering firms and the representatives that we talked to, and even on the client side. I mean, you're still going to have a fair amount, if not an extensive amount in initial stages of, the engineers themselves, employing these technologies, validating their use. Anybody who's gotten engaged or used ChatGPT or any other types of those AI tools that are out there, you learn very quickly that it takes a fair amount of training to get the AI model to return what it is that you're expecting. And then once it returns it, you still have the need to make sure that what it's returning is legitimate and valid. And, that becomes even, I think, more of a pressing issue when we're talking about, engineering and calculation types of things versus, just asking, ChatGPT or another tool to summarize something for you, so that's a very different process that you're going to be using, I think, going forward for engineers to make sure that what's being returned by these models is appropriate, and then and also take some time, obviously, to learn how to get them to to train them in different ways to return what you're looking for.
Great, thank you both for those insights. Next slide, Daphne.
Yeah, Kevin, before we move from this, I
Yeah.
just want to bring up something that's come up in the questions, and it's related to offshoring. And I don't know that we asked this question specifically in our interviews about how much of the lump sum work is being offshored. Maybe we did, and I missed that. But you know, maybe Eric, you have some sense of this. Are owners managing offshoring? Is that something that you're seeing in the project, in the lump sum projects?
No, and I'm not sure if I don't understand the context of that or not, but no, what our managers are managing. If for some reason a client, or I'm sorry, a consultant manager is trying to offshore and have somebody else do that work, that needs to be approved by the cabinet before we can make any kind of adjustment.
Are you seeing much of that in your
No, not from our
folks you're working
perspective.
with? No.
A lot of the clients, Eric, let me just paraphrase it, I think are really about using certainly US labor and to a large extent labor from their particular state. Is that a fair statement?
Completely. And again, within our process, the consultants, they provide a consultant team that's going to deliver the services. We approve that in advance. So if anything's going to change after we select the consultant team, we need to be aware of that. So we don't have that ability really in our process.
I mean, Daphne.
Yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead, Mike.
I'm sorry, Kevin. I think particularly with the larger global firms, I mean, it's used as a mechanism, Daphne, for cost arbitrage to, in this environment of limited resources, and finding a lower cost base in various parts of the world, either near shore or offshore. I think with the promise of these types of technologies that maybe able to mitigate that associated risk, where you can leverage these types of emerging technologies to make your staff more efficient, both intra-consultancy as well as Eric's DOT and the client organizations as well. So I think it's a way to perhaps over time address the industry's resource shortfall and drive efficiency without having to lean into those other cost arbitrage channels.
Thanks, Javier.
Mike,
Yeah. Go
Mike,
ahead,
let me say something, and Mike, if you could address this. We heard from a lot of clients, as Eric indicated, a fair and reasonable pricing, 15% for lump sum, 10% for cost plus, and that was a recurring theme from the clients. What I think was indirectly said by the clients was that if you're going to use cost arbitrage offshoring, putting work in work centers in India, Philippines, or places like that, that the clients, right now currently are more made in America, give me labor for my state because I'm a public agency. And B, if that was to occur, the DOT type clients would expect a reduction in price. So cost arbitrage concept would be out the window on the public side. On the private side, it certainly exists. And unfortunately, I've seen that just results in a lot of just decreased prices as you use the efficiencies, and the clients are well aware of it. So, Mike, would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I think that's consistent with what we heard from the clients that we interviewed, and that they expect the majority of the work's can be done by the staff that's been proposed as part of the as the response to whatever the RFP or the statement of qualifications and submitted. So those kind of changes aren't made without client oversight.
Right.
Awesome. Next slide, Devin. Okay, advantages to lump sum. Mike, can you just describe what we have here and
Sure.
Some highlights?
So as I mentioned at the outset, we did ask everyone interviewed, could they identify specific advantages and disadvantages of using lump sum. And so what this chart is summarizing is the advantages that we most frequently heard from both clients who are shown in the orange and from the firms that are shown in the blue. And so the way these frequencies were calculated, just very quickly, we took the responses that we heard from the different interviewees, categorized those into different thematic areas. And so we wound up with the themes you see on the left-hand side of the chart, or in the vertical axis of the chart. And then those themes were divided by the total number of responses. So if, as an example, the top advantage that was identified, by, both clients and firms, well, I should say by clients, and, almost equally as much by firms, was the reduced administrative burden. More than 25% of the clients that we interviewed, made mention of that particular advantage. And then if you look down, the chart, you see there was a good alignment with that advantage with the firms. Effective cost management, again, good alignment. Where the clients, identified some things that maybe you wouldn't necessarily expect the firms, the transferring of risk to consultants, identified as an advantage by the clients. But I don't think that means that the firms aren't willing to accept those risks, as long as those are risks that they're able to manage. But then as you kind of move your way down the chart, the flexibility that consultants get with lump sum was mentioned slightly more than effective cost management and reduced administrative burden. And so I think that speaks to a lot of things that we've sort of highlighted, during this webinar, is that, that's the kind of sort of flexibility that I think engineering firms are looking for, right? The ability to employ their resources in the firm as effectively as they can to deliver the services that their clients have specified, in any given.
Great, Mike, thanks. Eric, one of the big bars here that shows the clients perceive it as an advantage, and there's nothing for the firms, which is the one that says transferring risk to consultants. You indicated that the Kentucky transportation you have is willing to pay a little bit more for lump sum. Is that due to the recognition on your part that, the consultants are picking up more risk?
I think a little bit. Also, I don't want to make it seem like we're transferring a lot of risk to the consultant, because at the same time, we're actually taking risk away, I think, from both parties. For example, if we had let's just say we were going to negotiate $1 million contract. If it was a lump sum contract, it's $1 million either way. So the consultant's going to receive that money, the cabinet's going to pay that money. If it's a cost plus fixed fee, again, if we have a 10% profit on that, the consultant would be guaranteed to get $100,000, but the consultant may take a little bit less profit than expected, or they may actually be asked to pay a little bit more. So I think if it's lump sum, again, we try to use that when the scope is known. The consultant could end up taking a little bit more profit if they come out to being actually a $2 million profit. If it was a cost plus, they would receive that full amount. If it's $500,000, they would receive $500,000 plus their $100,000 fee. But if it's a lump sum contract, we're absolutely it's worth it from our perspective to transfer that risk to them. Again, at the same time, that doesn't mean that the DOT or the client is accepting no risk either. So we're part of the same team.
Great insights. I think we talked earlier that, in my old firms, we had as many overruns on quote unquote cost plus fixed fee work that we did on lump sum. So it's really, it's not an abdication of risk. One thing that Mike mentioned was the consultant staff flexibility advantage needed and cited by firms. What types of personnel does your agency changes absolutely want to know about, that you want to, recognize that certain positions are getting changed, and where do you sort of draw the line and let consultants just, change some folks, on the staff without, approvals and all that administrative burden?
Right. Again, from our perspective, the consultant team, they submit their response to advertisement, and we select based on that response to advertisement. So a big part of that is, of course, the consultant's proposed project manager. We're picking that consultant team based on qualifications. The project manager is a huge part of that qualification. So for some reason that after selection, if that project manager can no longer serve or is choosing to come off that contract, we absolutely need to know why. and we can make a decision from the state level as to whether or not we are willing to approve it. And if so, of course, the consultant would typically propose a replacement. But if we don't think that replacement meets muster, we can choose somebody else, even if we're willing to approve it. We don't, again, going back to the offshoring, that's not really much of an issue, as is really the rest of the project team is not either. We understand that things change after selection. The consultant industry, again, we rely on them to deliver here in Kentucky. And I don't think that's unique to Kentucky. The consultant industry is very busy right now. They're not only doing just one job, they're shuffling and trying to be efficient. And that again hits on several jobs across that company, across our state. So if they need to reallocate resources, again, assuming they have qualified people to fill in, we almost never stand in the way of that. So really, it's just as simple as just sending an email to me and our project manager. And I don't know if I've actually seen one that's been rejected yet, because again, we understand that flexibility is a big thing for them and for us as well.
Great, thank
Eric,
you so much.
hit on this a little bit, and it's the offshoring has taken on a whole life in the Q&A. But I think I heard you say that wasn't part of what you look at. There was a specific question about, do you have contractual language that precludes offshoring for your projects?
Yeah, I'm looking at that question now. It looks like it's based on design build rather than, by and large, we do design bid build. Again, if we're going to shift resources, we have to be aware of it. And we haven't even had a request to reallocate resources to offshore engineers yet. That may be something that's done in other construction areas where they're able to produce materials a little bit cheaper. But
yeah, I think
it's yet to hit the professional service portion.
The other comment, right, from a really large firm that is multinational, so they have resources already offshore, quote unquote, and so they may be leveraging those resources with projects here in the U.S. as well.
Right.
Next slide. Disadvantages. Mike, can you?
Yeah,
high level,
Kevin.
for this?
So again, the frequencies here calculated the same way we calculated the advantages, and so I think what sort of pops out here is, from the client perspective, there's a fair amount of concern about not adequately defining the scope, or where you have areas of uncertainties in the scope of work. We've talked a little bit about ways that can be addressed, either through phasing of contracts, hybrid contracts, and those sort of things. So I think there are ways to work around, those uncertainties. You start to look at, some of the things that may be a little bit surprising is, familiarity and experience with lump sum. I think that was pointed out by both clients and firms. I think from a client side, it's a little bit different issue than it is from a firm side. I think on a client side, it's more about, do the people you have in the place, are they aware of the slight variance or the differences with, managing a lump sum job versus a cost plus job? Because to be honest with you, it's probably a little bit easier to count the beans than it is to evaluate the deliverables, to be honest. I think the firm side, it's probably, in many cases, you maybe have a project manager doing a lump sum job for the first time, more familiar, or is more experienced with doing cost plus work, and might be thinking, well, we can do another iteration of this process or another iteration of the design, and that maybe works in a cost plus environment, but it's not necessarily going to work in a lump sum, where that additional iteration is now starting to eat into your profit margin as opposed to an effort basis. So those were some of the key things that we heard. You can see the frequency of the responses for the different types of disadvantages that were identified there. I think we're probably going to talk about this potential impact on quality just a little bit, even though that was not cited very frequently. I think there are lots of things in place within the environment of engineering design services, you know, the expectation of client organizations and so forth, you know, the qualifications-based selection process, the prevalence of repeat business, those, I think those factors as well as others mitigate that concern about, is there going to be design product that's produced that doesn't meet the quality standards that either the client expects or the firm themselves expect.
Great, Mike. Yeah, thanks. We'll get into that in the next slide. Eric, I just got one question for you on this one. Do you at the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet like to have your team develop the first draft of the scope, or do you like the consultants to do the first draft? Or do you use a hybrid method?
Yeah, it actually usually depends, to be honest, depending on how, I guess this goes into something that's a factor on every project as well, is how experienced is our cabinet's project manager? Because a lot of times in our past, our cabinet's project manager may have had 20 years of experience. A lot of times now, our cabinet's project manager may have 5 years of experience. And that's 5 years of not project manager experience, that's 5 years of experience with the cabinet. So in that case, we would sometimes allow the consultant to help develop the scope, and our cabinet's project manager is not on an island. They have a location engineer that's here out of our central office, which is a liaison for them. They also have my staff that helps to assist during those scoping meetings. But there's usually a small army of folks on the cabinet side that helps develop the scope and refine the scope. But that's the most critical part of everything, is understanding what your expectations are, understanding what your level of effort is. And again, if that's something where we don't have a long history of project type work like that, we have the ability to again, go cost plus fixed fee. But by and large, again, about 80% or so of the time, we're utilizing lump sum, because it's a traditional type project where we have dozens and dozens, if not more than 100 projects that are very similar, and we have detailed records for that. So we understand exactly what level of effort we're expecting the consultant to be able to take. And again, we want to be able to compensate them accordingly for doing that work.
Thanks, Eric. I think the one reassuring fact that Mike and I heard many times over was that both the consultant side and the DOT side want to get it right and want to be fair to each other. So that was, I think, a big advantage of the relationship that we have with each other. Next slide, Daphne. All right, this is a detailed key findings, and the first, we talked about the project deliverables more than in administration, so I don't think we need to revisit that. I'd like Javier to just address, the findings that we found using technology to optimally use human technological and financial resources to deliver value. Can you just give us a couple of thoughts on that, Javier, from your point of view?
Yeah, I think there's just promise there to everyone is concerned. Is this going to, how is it going to impact my job? Is this going to eliminate it? I would say far from that. I believe it's going to be a companion. It's going to, I think, as Eric has rightfully said, is how can we make the experience for that employee better? How can they leverage the talents that they have for what they were educated for and desire to do? So I think there's a lot of promise of how do we leverage these technologies to make them more efficient. Theoretically, should have greater job satisfaction and better outcomes as a result of that. So I think a lot of this is on the come. There's been marked improvement in terms of efficiencies over the years. So this isn't a to-be state, but I think that it's going to change, and it's going to change in a big way, and I think in a better way. And I think the sooner that a firm can lean into this and understand it and define the use cases, and I think it'll be a welcome addition for for the engineer of tomorrow, for them to really become more efficient. They're going to be a different type of engineer. They're going to be not just a professional engineer. They're going to be a software engineer. They're going to be leveraging low code, no code, and many would argue they're going to be a data scientist along the way too. So it's going to be a hybrid worker with skills that need to be developed and trained in the future. But exciting time, a really exciting once in a generation opportunity, I might add, for our industry. So
great, awesome, thank you. Row 2, Daphne. There's a couple of major points in this row. Eric, I'd like you to address the second from the left box about how lump sum is really not as much of a quantum leap from, cost plus fixed fee work as maybe some clients and engineering firms think. Can you just address that from your point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. So from my perspective, honestly, it's nearly identical. We actually even use the exact same fee proposal form. The only change is, again, that rather than using a 15% profit on a lump sum, we use a 10% profit on a fixed fee. So that, and then again, that fixed fee is then built in. That's all that the consultant's guaranteed for. The rest is just what our best guess. It almost gives close to a not to exceed amount, but then again, as we're working to kind of deliver that project, things change. If the consultant needs to go above, they can, assuming that the cabinet has adequate funds, they can exceed that total fee. Whereas that obviously does not happen on a lump sum with a built-in 15% profit. But again, that lump sum is a total not to exceed amount unless there is a cost or a contract modification that comes up later.
Great, thank you. Mike, we talked about the hybrid structures. Can you just describe how many times that came up as a potential solution to, the different unknowns and development of a project using lump sum?
Yeah, Kevin, I mean, I think I can talk about both the hybrid and the phasing. I think those both are very important concepts those that maybe are, a little bit hesitant because of uncertainty that are in, that's in just about every job. So the hybrid structure, as Eric sort of talked about, is, you've got items of work in a particular scope, that where you have less uncertainty. Maybe it is that coordination with third parties, like you talked about those LPA type projects that you mentioned. So that's going to be handled on a reimbursable basis versus a lump sum basis, or maybe it's something related to geotechnical investigation, right? You got to do a certain amount of geotech investigation, and there's going to be some uncertainty associated with the amount of effort that's involved there. So I think those are the types of things you see in the hybrid structures. I think the organizations like Kentucky, the cabinet, who are using phasing, again, are using that phasing in an incremental sort of fashion, right? They've got a concept for a project, and they're gonna use a lump sum arrangement up until, let's say, 10% design, 15% design, whatever it might be. They get to that point, and then they feel comfortable with where they are, or maybe they don't feel comfortable where they are, and then they make a decision about, are they going to then go from 15 to say 30%, right? With the next lump sum arrangement, or do they feel like they can take it a bit further? So again, I think that varies from project to project with how these sort of phasing approaches are used. And I think what we saw in talking to some of these clients that use that phasing sort of approach is, you might have, a contract for phase one, a contract for phase two, or it might be you start out with a contract and then you issue a modification. So you're essentially just modifying the base contract as you move forward, through the design development process.
Great, thanks, Mike. We're running up against time, but Eric, one quick word from you on how you found the quality. Consultants obviously need repeat work from DOTs. They have liability concerns. There's QBS. There's licensing requirements. A lot of reasons to keep quality up to the highest level as possible. Can you just address how you view the level of quality in lump sum versus other methodologies?
Yeah, and I'll be brief because I want to leave time for Javier to wrap up. But yeah, by and large, again, this is not a blank check for anybody. There's a lot of controls on everything associated with lump sum, all the way from selection to, again, we start with a scoping. We're involved throughout that. We agree to level of effort. As Dr. Garvin just stated, we do phased contracts just to make sure that we don't have too much risk on either side. So we break that into smaller segments. In Kentucky, using those phase contracts, we average about a 4-month turnaround from the time that we advertise until we issue notice to proceed. So we can do things in a lot quicker process because we don't have those. Everything is low-hanging fruit. We don't have those large nebulous items that we're waiting to decide on. Getting back to the tail end, we perform performance evaluations on every single contract. Consultants know if we get rich off this contract, the cabinet's going to find out, and we may have won this small job, may have gotten a 50% profit instead of 15, but that's going to probably hurt our chances of getting selected in the future. And again, making sure that our post audits using our team of auditors is in line with our expectations, again, kind of ties a bow on the back end as well. And then, of course, those evaluations are shared with our selection committees when they're making that next selection. So consultants, we're lucky to have the robust industry that we do here in Kentucky. We wouldn't be successful without them, but they're all also on the same team that we are. They don't want to get rich on one job because they know that's just shooting themselves in the foot for later.
No truer words have ever been spoken, Eric. Thank you so much. Javier, last words.
Just thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to be on this distinguished panel with Eric and Mike and Kevin. Certainly, Daphne, congratulations to you and the ACEC Research Institute for the great work that you have led on this initiative. Super important for our industry. These are exciting times to really reshape our industry for the future. And certainly, we're blessed to have great clients in the industry like Eric and Kentucky DOT, and certainly Mike will keep up the great work as well going forward with these types of initiatives. So I'll just end it with a thank you to all, and wish you all a great afternoon. God bless you all.
Thank you, Daphne.
Thank you. Thank you, Javier. I do want to give a shout out to BST Global and to our other sponsors who made this research possible. This was not part of our initial plan for our last fiscal year. So we did get some additional funding for this project. So thank you for that. There was one question I do want to address, and I know we're a couple minutes over, but I think it's an important one. There's a question about how we're going to use this study with DOTs and what is ACEC's role. So the Institute's role is to conduct the research and to deliver the research and educate on it. ACEC's role is to advocate with it. And so exactly to the question, we have some resources that ACEC is creating for the state member organizations to be able to use with their DOTs and other agencies. We're going to have a webinar presentation for those executives at the state member organizations to help them prepare to use those materials. But we're also doing education through ASJO. So we're working on some webinars that we're going to do for their members as well. We wanted to start with obviously the ACEC membership and share this with our firms, but we are going to be talking to the clients as well as our state member organizations. So lots of education still to happen, and awareness building and sharing, and more to come on that. With that, I will thank Eric and Mike and Javier, Kevin. Thank you all so much for a great discussion. Thanks to the audience for lots of great questions and comments. And until next time, stay well, and we will see you soon.
Have a great day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. Thank you.